What's up, Curl Fam? It's your girl, Curly Cass. Welcome back to another video where I share my experiences as a mother, mental health clinician, and curly girl. So today I'm going to be continuing my breastfeeding series, which I'm really excited about. So today we are going to be moving on from all things related to topics and lingo that you need to know and terminology to part one, which is the truth about breastfeeding. So when I first started my breastfeeding journey, I was a newbie. So I was a first-time mom. I had this totally different expectation of what breastfeeding was going to be like. And so the purpose of this breastfeeding series is really to help people along their breastfeeding journey, to make it a much smoother and easier one. And hopefully some of you can relate to what I've been going through, especially in the beginning stages of not knowing, having a lot of questions, and having a totally different set of expectations from what the reality of breastfeeding actually is. And I feel like a lot of this happens because we had this expectation of what breastfeeding should be, usually based off of how our moms or how our grandmothers or aunts, anybody who we know, friends, family members who have breastfed in the past. I feel like not a lot of people are super honest about what breastfeeding entails. And so that is the purpose of this video, is to not only give you some truth to breastfeeding, but also to drop some knowledge on you as well and give you some of my pro tips that I've learned over the last 6 months that have really truly helped me along my breastfeeding journey. And I'm really hoping that this can help somebody else on their breastfeeding journey. So the purpose of this video is to really drop some knowledge on you as well as give you some tips. So I'm gonna start off with a truth about breastfeeding that people don't talk about or that you normally don't know, and then also drop some knowledge on you and some tips that can help you out with this truth about breastfeeding. So the very first truth about breastfeeding that I came to see fairly quickly in my journey was that there is an intense amount of nipple pain, okay? So nipple pain is a real thing. When you're pregnant, and this happened to me, I don't know if it happens to everybody, but when I was pregnant, my nipples were super sensitive. Like, I'm talking when I was in the shower, like the sensation of the water beating down on my chest was too much. Like, I used to have to cover up my chest so that the shower head did not hurt. That's how intense it was. Like, it was so intense that if I would brush up against anything, whether it was my own arm or whether it was I don't know, my fiance or something, it was just so sensitive that I could not handle it. So when I started breastfeeding, it was absolutely terrible. Like, my nipples were so sensitive, and there was also so much excruciating pain that came with breastfeeding that absolutely nobody told me. So here are some pro tips to deal with inevitable nipple pain. Use oils, balms, and lotions. So something that I did a lot is that I would alternate from coconut oil and a lanolin cream that I used that was really good. It was super helpful. And what I did was I would take one with no scent and no type of essential oil ingredients, so that way it didn't interact with the baby while I was breastfeeding him. So my process was that I would go ahead and breastfeed him, whatever side, both sides, depending on what stage we were at, and I'll get into that later. I would just go ahead after every feeding, take some of that oil or take some of that lanolin cream that I had, and I would go ahead and just generously apply it to your nipples. So that is really going to help with keeping them hydrated, and keeping them hydrated helps prevent having cracked nipples, bleeding nipples, chapped nipples. It is insane the amount of work that you have to do when it comes to breastfeeding. So one thing that you really want to make sure that you do to help avoid or help ease some of that nipple pain is to keep them hydrated. Also, icing them if they're really bad, or using a heat pad helps. I used to put a washcloth with cold water and go ahead and just put them on top, because they just ache so badly, and it hurts, and it's this inexplicable pain that it's just intense. It's so intense. And right after you have a baby and you're breastfeeding, it's a lot. You're constantly putting the baby on to eat, and if you're pumping on top of it, you're constantly putting your nipples to work, and it is something that you've never done before if you're a first-time mom or if it's your first time breastfeeding, and it's a lot to manage. So just make sure you keep them hydrated, and that helps a lot with managing the nipple pain. Now, the next truth about breastfeeding is that you never know how much your baby is eating. And this sounds like something that would make sense, but until you're breastfeeding, you don't know why that's so important. So knowing how much your baby eats is super important, because it helps you time out when the next time is that they should eat, and how much they should be eating, and how much they need to be full. But if you're only breastfeeding and you're not bottle feeding, especially in the beginning, I think it's hard to introduce a bottle in the very beginning. In the very beginning, it's really important to know how much milk they're taking in, but it's impossible to know if you're only breastfeeding. So usually in the hospital, or right after you have your baby, they will have you time 5 to 10 minutes and keep track of alternating breaths. So in the very beginning, your baby's stomach is like the size of a pea. So it's like super tiny and they get full fast. So when you don't know how much your baby is eating, you don't know how to gauge when the next feeding should be. You don't know how to gauge how much they should be eating for. So here are some pro tips to help you with this difficult truth about breastfeeding. Something that I did in the very beginning and that your hospital will encourage you to do is to time yourself. So I would put the baby on for at least 5 minutes each breast. And in the very beginning, I would alternate breasts, right? So in the very beginning, let's say Avery was eating at like 3 o'clock. I would look at my timer. I would put on a timer on my phone actually, and I would time myself for 5 minutes on that breast and made sure that he would eat off of that breast for 5 minutes. I would sit him up and I would burp him. And then usually what they do in the beginning, especially in the hospital, is they will have you alternate breasts. So the next feeding, you'll do the right side. So one pro tip that I have is to always offer both breasts, right? So let's say even in the newborn stage, even if your baby is literally a day old, I say offer both breasts because it's going to ensure that your baby is eating everything that it needs to eat and that it has access to your breast milk. So you're not just timing your baby on one breast and being like, okay, well, you must be done because you must be full. And then 30 minutes later, your baby's hungry again. So this can especially help with cluster feeding. So cluster feeding is a tricky thing because it's something that you may or may not be able to avoid. So cluster feeding is when your baby is frequently eating. So your baby is eating every 30, 40, 50 minutes to an hour. And that usually happens in the very beginning, especially if you're in the first week and you don't have that milk flow yet. Cluster feeding is going to be something that you deal with a lot, and it is the worst for that nipple pain that I talked about earlier. So my pro tip to deal with not knowing how much your baby is eating when you're only breastfeeding them, time yourself, number one. Make sure that you're giving them at least 5 to 10 minutes on each breast and always offer both breasts. That's like the biggest tip that I can give, is to always offer both breasts. So when you're done feeding them on the left side or right side, whichever one you start off with, you want to sit them up, burp them, give them a minute, and then offer them your other breast. Let them be on that breast until they tell you that they're done. And another pro tip that I have is to not go based off of time intervals. So what I mean by that is, in the very beginning, even before I had my son, I always thought that babies eat every 2 hours. So I did not understand why Avery was crying 45 minutes after feeding, and then it wasn't a diaper, he wasn't tired, he wasn't this, he wasn't that. It wasn't like he was trying to self-soothe. He was crying because he was hungry. And I didn't understand because I'm like, no, he's supposed to eat every 2 hours. Do not go by timed intervals in the very beginning. In the very beginning, just focus on feeding your baby. So in order to avoid a lot of frustration on your part, your partner's part, on the baby's part, focus on offering both breasts. Focus on timed feeding. So making sure that you're offering at least 5 to 10 minutes on each breast. And avoiding timed intervals. So don't depend on your baby eating every 2 hours because every infant is different and you don't know how much milk they're getting. The next truth about breastfeeding is that you are going to have such poor posture when you're breastfeeding. So I found myself having a lot of back pain, especially in the very beginning, because I just had a baby. So my body is trying to recover and I'm trying to feed this baby, and I just find myself frequently like hunched over, just like this. And I have my baby right here. And in the beginning, he was so small that I would just hold him in my arm sometimes. If it was like, he's screaming at the top of his lungs and I need to feed him like right now, I would just grab him and just hold him because he was so tiny. He like fit right here in my forearm, which was, miss those days. So that's going to cause you a lot of back pain, is having that poor posture when you're breastfeeding. So some pro tips that I have are to use a pillow, use some type of support. You can use a bobby pillow. They have all types of pillows now. They have the, I think it's called My Breast Friend. They have so many different options for you to look through. So make sure that you invest in that if breastfeeding is something that you want to try or that you're committed to doing after your pregnancy. Second pro tip when it comes to poor posture is to bring your baby to your nipples. So one thing that I found myself doing a lot was holding my baby and leaning forward to feed him. So instead of doing that, bring the baby to you, bring the baby to your nipple. So that makes it a lot easier for you to sit back, makes it a lot easier for your back to be straight and to avoid that poor posture and to avoid a lot of back pain and discomfort. So like I said, use a pillow, use a chair like this. This chair has saved my life when it comes to breastfeeding because I can just easily sit back and have him right here. So it gives me the back support that I need. Sit in a comfortable chair. Get in a comfortable position when it's time to breastfeed, especially in the beginning. It takes so long. Like babies can breastfeed for like 20 to 30 minutes sometimes. So you want to get comfortable. You want to make sure that you're not hunched over for 20-25 minutes because that's going to cause you a lot of discomfort. Another truth about breastfeeding is that it can be difficult to get your baby to latch and fully grab onto the nipple the way that they are supposed to in order to get the most milk. And so when their latch isn't correct, it causes a lot of nipple pain. It causes a lot of discomfort for you. It causes a lot of frustration for them. You're frustrated. They like can't figure it out. Like if you have breastfed before, you know what I'm talking about. Like you bring the baby up and they're just like doing this weird thing with their mouth where like, you know, like help me, I'm so hungry, but they're not grabbing the nipples. So one pro tip that I have for helping with latching is to make sure that your nipple is fully exposed, right? So you're not kind of like having it halfway in your bra or halfway in your shirt, like have it out, especially in the beginning. Like your baby might need some help because they're so tiny and their mouths are so little. So they need some help opening it all the way up. So one thing that I did that really helped me a lot was to take your thumb and just pull down their little chin just like this and take your nipple and go ahead and offer it that way. So you want to have their chin down and offer the nipple into their mouth that way at an angle. So when you pull their chin down, you go ahead and you go from their nose. I would always go from his nose and drag it right down into his mouth while I'm just gently pulling down his chin. So that helped me a lot with getting a proper latch so that way he could get the most out of his sucks and he wouldn't get tired or frustrated and I wouldn't have any nipple pain. It was a win-win. Now, I always heard about babies that get milk drug, but I did not know that 95% of the time when you breastfeed, babies will fall asleep at your nipple. And this is especially true in the newborn phase. So I had no idea that this was a thing. And so, you know, they're sleeping and you're like, oh, thank God, you know, they're sleeping, just let them sleep. You put them down, or maybe you hold them and you nap for a little bit with them, whatever your situation is. And about 30-40 minutes later, they're hungry again. Sometimes even 5 to 10 minutes later, they wake up and they're hungry again. So one pro tip that I have to avoid this situation from happening is whenever you find them falling asleep and you know they've only been sucking for maybe 1 to 2, 3 minutes, and you want to make sure you get that full 5 to 10 minutes. Remember, we're offering each breast. You want to take their little cheeks, just take your thumb and your pointer finger and just go ahead and squeeze that mouth open, and that'll wake them right up. So especially in the newborn stage, they fall asleep so quickly, especially after drinking. And I think it's because they expend a lot of energy trying to get the milk out. And so they just get tired really quickly. So one thing that really has helped me was just whenever Avery was falling asleep and it's only been a couple minutes that he's eating and I know he didn't get everything that he needed, I would just go ahead and take his little cheeks and I would just squeeze them open and make sure that he's getting my milk. Or sometimes I would squeeze my breast and make sure that milk was coming out and that he could taste it. He would wake right up and start drinking again. And you just repeat that as many times as you need until it's been that 5 to 10 minutes or until you've offered both breasts and you know that they're full. Now, this truth about breastfeeding may sound like it's something that you should know, but it was something that I didn't realize until I started breastfeeding. So one thing that I didn't realize is that the truth about breastfeeding is that it is really, really hard and that it is very inconvenient at times and that you have to sort of like finagle your way in certain situations if you're in public or even if you're at home. So sometimes you have to get creative with breastfeeding. And so one thing that I found that was really helpful is to wear clothes that are conducive to breastfeeding. Now, when I say this, I mean, when you are breastfeeding, you have to throw out all of your fancy, beautiful, lacy bras that are just so cute and comfortable, you know, and that have all those little bedazzle and designs on them. Because the truth is, trying to whip out a boob while your baby's screaming at the top of their lungs, you're sweating, you're trying to take off your sweater, you're trying to do all of these things. Maybe if you're in public, you're trying to do all these things in public discreetly or not discreetly. I don't know your life, but if that's what you're doing, it is really hard to do. So breastfeeding is already difficult in itself. So my pro tip is to wear clothes and bras that are conducive to breastfeeding. So I have been wearing my nursing bra probably since I gave birth. So I tried to go back to my little like t-shirt bras, you know, my bralettes, and it just wasn't happening. So right now those bras are in a drawer hidden away because I'm not going to see them for probably another year. I really wanted to still wear my bras. I really still wanted to be myself, you know, before having a baby. But the truth is that you want to make your life as easy as possible. So I was sweating. Like I would be breaking a sweat trying to take off a jacket, trying to take off a shirt, trying to, you know what I mean, use my old bras and like hold up a pump over here and hold up my baby over here. Like it just wasn't happening. Nursing bras are meant to help you make breastfeeding easier. So use them, utilize them. If you get 2 or 3 good nursing bras, you are good to go. Like you don't need to have an extensive amount, but you do need to have some. Another truth about breastfeeding is that breastfeeding in public can be very intimidating and it can be very difficult. So what I mean by that is that sometimes, I know I felt this, you don't know how people are going to respond to breastfeeding in public. I feel like I've always seen a lot of videos on Facebook of like people's reactions to women breastfeeding, and it's never good. And I was worried about this a lot in the very beginning when I would go out with Avery, and he was hungry, so I had to breastfeed him. And a couple of things that I didn't realize were that, number one, it's real hard to breastfeed in public. Like I'm all about free the nipple, you know, I'm here for it. But I personally am not that courageous. I wish that I was sometimes, but I'm just not. So also, it was like October, November, December when Avery was a newborn. So I was not freeing anything. So I would use like a breastfeeding cover. So what I used was, it was just like something from Walmart, something really basic. You just pull it over your head, hold the baby up. But when I tell you, it was a lot harder. Like the first time that I breastfed in public was a lot harder than I thought it was gonna be. So you have the baby that's crying, and then people are like looking at you and they're like, oh my God, that baby's crying. And you're like, okay, I know he's hungry. Let me just, you know, get myself together. You have to lift up your shirt. If you're wearing a shirt, at that time I was wearing a shirt because like I said, it was fall, winter. I'm lifting up my shirt. I'm pulling down my bra. I'm tucking in like, you know, that flap for my nursing bra so that he can get in. I'm pulling over my pullover to cover myself. He's, you know, my fiance's got the baby. It is a lot. So if you're breastfeeding and you're going out in public, just be prepared for that. So some pro tips are, like I said, wear clothes and bras that are conducive to breastfeeding, and don't be afraid to ask for help. If you're with family members or a partner or friends, just let them know, hey, I might need you to hold the baby really quickly while I get myself settled. Don't be embarrassed to ask for help. Don't be embarrassed either when other people are staring or looking. Just take your time. If the baby's crying, just know the baby will be okay. Don't worry about people staring at you or giving you negative looks or vibes or anything like that. Just do you, focus on you, and you'll be good. But just know that the first time you breastfeed in public may be a little bit scary, maybe a little bit intimidating, and it's definitely a process. So another fact about breastfeeding is that what you eat and what you drink truly impacts your milk supply. And so this was something that I didn't really realize, but you have to really take care of yourself when you're breastfeeding. You know, it is not for the faint of heart. Breastfeeding is so difficult. Like it is one of the most difficult things that I have ever done. You have to be 100% committed, and that includes being committed to having a good diet, making sure that you're getting all your fluids in, that you're drinking enough water, that you're taking care of yourself, that you're resting as much as you possibly can, which seems impossible with a newborn. You have to remember that you are literally sustaining somebody's life. You are the reason that they are able to eat, that they are able to survive, that they are being nourished, that they are here. So no pressure or anything, but you really have to be committed to it, and you also have to be committed to taking care of yourself. Self-care is huge if you're going to be breastfeeding. You have to remember that you have to be good in order to feed your baby. I didn't realize that everything that I do, everything that I eat, everything that I consume, everything that I breathe in affects my baby and my milk supply. So if you're having gas from something that you ate, your baby's gonna have gas from something that you ate. If you are having heartburn from spicy food, it's probably not gonna go well for your baby. Like, If you're not drinking enough water, you're not going to produce enough milk. It is insane how much taking care of yourself is such an important role and such an important part of breastfeeding. So that is a truth that I did not know, and that is a pro tip that you absolutely need in order to have a successful breastfeeding journey, is that it is as much about you as it is about that baby. And if you're not taking care of yourself, you can't help your baby. With that being said, another truth is that there are supplements to help. So you can have lactation cookies, there are brownies, there are so many different like teas and supplements, pills that you can take to help. So make sure you do your research. If you're having a hard time with your milk supply and you're drinking all the water that you need to drink and your diet is healthy and you're taking care of yourself, if you're still having a hard time with milk supply, make sure you look into having supplements, because that was something that I did not know, that there are supplements to help with milk production. Another fun fact is that alcohol helps. So despite what people may say about pumping and dumping, so we'll get into that another day, and that you can't breastfeed after you drink alcohol, it's absolutely not true. So the amount of alcohol that is actually in your breast milk after you consume it is so small that you would have to drink an absurd amount in order to impact your baby at all. So having a glass or two of wine, having a couple of drinks, even having a couple of shots is just fine. Do your research if you still feel a little bit uncertain, but the yeast and alcohol actually helps a lot. So make sure that you look into that. Don't feel like you can't drink just because you're breastfeeding, because that's actually a really huge myth that people don't really know and that I didn't know. So that is a fun fact about breastfeeding. So this is a really ugly truth about breastfeeding, and it is that it takes about 4 to 7 days for your actual milk to come in. So in the beginning of your breastfeeding journey, the only thing that's going to come out is something that's called colostrum. It's usually like this really thick, like yellowish consistency, and it is the most important part of your breast milk that comes out, but it's not the actual milk. So it's everything that the baby needs, but it's a super teeny tiny amount, but it's okay because in the newborn stage, that's all they need. But as time goes on, they are going to get bigger. As time goes on, they do get hungrier. And so waiting for my milk to come in, it felt like the longest 4 days of my life, because I was going nuts trying to feed Avery and just not being certain that he was getting milk, feeling like I was starving him, like he was losing so much weight, which most breastfed babies lose a lot of weight in the beginning because we're waiting for our milk to come in. So that is an ugly truth. Don't worry about hurting your baby. Don't worry about your baby not getting enough, because it will come in. And when it does, your baby will be right back up to where they were before with their birth weight, and your pediatrician will help you along that journey and making sure that your baby is okay. And if you need to supplement, they will let you know. But trust yourself, trust your body knows what to do. So another truth about breastfeeding is that it is a supply and demand process, meaning as much demand as you have is as much supply as you will get. So it's really important to breastfeed your baby as much as possible. If you're pumping, to pump as much as possible, because if you don't, then your body thinks that, well, you don't need that much milk, so this is what I'm going to give you because this is what you need. If your baby's eating every hour and you put your baby up every hour, your milk will come in like this. It will come in and be ready to be drained out every hour. My pro tip is to feed as much as possible, pump as much as possible. Another ugly truth about breastfeeding is that it can actually be a really isolating experience. And so what I mean by this is that you are the only one who can feed your baby. You are the only reason that that baby is still alive. You are the only reason that that baby is able to have nourishment, able to survive. And that is no small feat. So if you are breastfeeding, please do not take it lightly, because it is so hard to do. And I know from experience how isolating it can be. You don't have any help if you're exclusively breastfeeding. You are the one waking up every 45 minutes or every hour, every 2 hours to feed your baby constantly. It is extremely frustrating. It is extremely painful, and it takes a ton of commitment to do. And if people have not breastfed before, they really don't understand what you're going through. And it's such an isolating experience too, especially if you're breastfeeding in public. Like I said, you know, sometimes women feel so uncomfortable with breastfeeding in public that they will go into a bathroom and close the door and feed their baby in the bathroom, or they will sit in the corner of the party and breastfeed, you know, at a family function, or go in a separate bedroom because they don't want to offend anybody. And it is insane. And it's so isolating. It can be so isolating if you don't have the right support or if you don't have people around you who understand how you're feeling. My pro tip for that is to just make sure that you are not isolating yourself. So make sure that you're not sort of projecting your worries onto other people and worrying that they might be uncomfortable with it. Like if they're uncomfortable with it, that's their business. That doesn't mean anything about what you're doing. Nothing that you're doing is wrong. It's all natural. It is okay. There is nothing wrong with breastfeeding, especially breastfeeding in public. And so my other pro tip to dealing with the isolation is, and to people who don't understand, is to positively reframe what your experience is like. So instead of thinking, oh my God, everybody at this party must think that this is so weird, everybody at this restaurant must think that this is so weird, positively frame that and think to yourself, you know what I'm doing is really cool. And maybe they're looking at me because they've never seen anybody breastfeed before, and maybe they have unanswered questions, or maybe they just think that it's really cool that I am breastfeeding. Another ugly, very, very ugly truth to breastfeeding that I was not aware of before I started my journey was that people will praise you for breastfeeding and then insult you for breastfeeding all in the same sentence. So they will praise you and say, oh my God, it's so great that you're breastfeeding. You know, there's so many benefits and yada, 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 and blah, blah, blah. And then in the same breath, they will insult you and be like, well, how do you know that your baby's getting enough milk? And that's a lot of work. And for me, especially, and I don't know if it's just because I have a boy and people are like obsessed with how much he weighs and how big he is. Like he's supposed to be like 16 pounds at 3 months old. But a lot of people were very discouraging and saying, well, like maybe you should just supplement. Maybe you should just supplement because he's really small. He's a really small baby. And mind you, he was normal for his weight. Like he is perfectly normal. He's not this overly huge baby, but he's just a regular sized baby. And so on the one hand, I was getting all these compliments, you know, like, oh, that's so great. That's so wonderful that you're breastfeeding. And then at the same time, it was like, well, why isn't he bigger? Like he should be bigger and you're clearly not feeding him enough. And maybe you're not making enough milk. Maybe you're not doing this. And it's so insulting. So just be prepared to deal with that. So my pro tip for dealing with that is stick to your guns. You don't have to explain yourself to anybody. You're doing what you feel is best for your child and you know what's best for them. You know that they are healthy and happy and there is nothing wrong with your choice to breastfeed. Another ugly truth about breastfeeding is that it can be very overwhelming and it can be very frustrating. And sometimes you feel frustrated at your baby. Sometimes you feel frustrated at yourself and you always feel like you're in a rush to breastfeed, right? Because the baby is crying and you're like, the baby is starving, because that is how they are acting. Like your baby will cry like it hasn't eaten in 3 days when really they just ate 30 minutes ago. So one thing that I learned to do that really helped me so much with just staying sane and staying patient was in between the time that my baby would eat, I started to just enjoy my baby. I just started to love on my baby and enjoy my baby. And even though I was so exhausted and so tired, I would spend my in-between feeding time loving on my baby. And that is the biggest pro tip that I can give to you when you're feeling overwhelmed. After you're done feeding and your baby falls asleep and they're laying on your chest, just hug them, just hold them, just rock them, be with them, be in the moment as much as you can, and just try to think of all the positive things. One thing that I started doing a lot was I would say out loud, like, oh, I love you so much, I love you so much. And it really, not that I was trying to convince myself, but it really reminded me and helped me to stay in the moment and remember that, like, this baby and I were in this together and we're both trying to figure this out, and it's hard for both of us and it's going to be okay. Now, in order to deal with all of these truths of breastfeeding, my biggest pro tip is to have patience. Have patience with yourself, have patience with your baby, have patience with this whole process of breastfeeding, because you are going to need it. It is not for the faint of heart, like I said earlier. Take a deep breath, talk yourself through it, take a minute to yourself, and just remember why you're doing this. Remember that you can do this, that your body was designed to do this. And it sounds so cheesy to say, but when you're in the moment of feeding your baby, you have to think to yourself, like, I am a badass. Like, I am the only one who can feed this baby. I am the only one who can do this. Stick to your guns. Don't explain yourself to anybody. Do you. this is what you want to do. You make your choice, you stick to it, because you can do it and I'm here to help. So this concludes the second part of my breastfeeding series. If you like this video and you want to see more, please hit subscribe, please hit the like button, comment below, let me know if there are some more tips or questions that you have at all. And I really look forward to continuing this series, and I will see you guys in my next video.